to the Community Reinvestment Area Residential Tax Abatement Policy. The CRA policy serves to incentivize the creation of affordable housing units and create accessibility for individuals and families. The residential incentive policy was adopted by City Council in July of 2018 and has made significant changes to support affordable, mixed-income neighborhoods in the city's post-1994 community reinvestment areas. Neighborhoods were placed into one of three categories: market-ready, ready for revitalization, or ready for opportunity based on the following criteria: population growth, median household income growth, poverty rate, growth in median rent, housing vacancy rate, and mortgage foreclosure rate. Within these areas, housing developers are eligible for a tax abatement if they set aside a percentage of a development's units for residents that meet certain income criteria. This ultimately seeks to build equity by encouraging the creation of mixed-income neighborhoods and ensure that residents have access to units and developments they may not be able to otherwise afford. Last year, the current incentive policy was up for review. In December, we hosted a public hearing to share the updated policy and heard community feedback, which took us back to the drawing board. I knew that we needed to be more intentional and had to push for deeper affordability. Before we hear the proposed changes, I think it's important for us to level set just a bit to ensure that we all have an understanding of the terms that you will hear throughout the hearing this evening. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD, defines and calculates area median income, or AMI, for every region of the country. In Columbus, 100% of the area median income would reflect an individual who makes approximately $57,800 annually and be able to pay $1,445 per month for rent without being rent burdened. A person is rent burdened if they are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. A family of four would be bringing in approximately $83,812 annually, paying around $2,100 per month for rent and utilities, would also be included in the 100% area median income category. An individual making $47,000 annually and able to pay $1,200 per month without being rent burdened would fall into the 80% area median income category. And a family of four would be bringing in approximately $67,000 annually, paying around $1,700 per month for rent and utilities without being rent burdened. And individuals making $35,000 annually and able to pay $880 per month without being rent burdened would fall into the 60% area median income category. And a family of four would be bringing in approximately $50,000 annually, paying around $1,200 per month for utilities without being rent burdened. As I mentioned earlier, the Department of Development has gone back and reviewed the CRA policy and has identified opportunities to ask developers to expand the affordability. The new policy asks developers to go deeper or wider in creating affordability in order to earn an abatement. The policy set in 2018 asked developers to set aside 10% of the units for residents earning 80% of the area median income and 10% for residents earning 100% of the area median income in order to earn a tax abatement. Under the proposed policy, developers could choose to go deeper in creating affordability by setting aside 10% of units for residents earning 60% of the area median income and 10% for residents earning 80% of the area median income, or go wider in creating affordability by setting aside 30% of units for residents earning 80% of the area median income. We know Columbus is facing a housing crisis, which has only been heightened by the pandemic. While the city and our many housing partners have done significant work over the past year to keep families stabilized and housing secure, we have a lot more work to do. The need for affordable housing is greater than ever, and we need to be proactive about creating progressive policies to protect our most vulnerable residents. However, the reality is there is no silver bullet to fix the problem of housing, and City Council cannot do it alone. There must be a concerted effort at all levels in creating solutions to alleviate the housing crisis. The CRA is only one of those tools. I'd like to thank Director Stevens and the Department of Development for your work to get us here today. This evening, we will hear from Erin Prosser, Assistant Director of Housing Strategies, who will walk us through the proposed updates to the CRA policy. Prior to her presentation, I will provide the Development Director, Michael Stevens, an opportunity to make remarks. At this time, I'll turn the floor over to Director Mike Stevens.
Good evening, and thank you, Chair Favor, for hosting this public hearing. I want to thank you for your leadership and your partnership as we have reviewed this incentive policy and made changes that will advance a tool that will not only encourage more houses being developed, but more affordable component to that in the mixed income neighborhoods that you talked about earlier. I will be brief because I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Erin Prosser, so she can walk through how this tool is a component of a bigger housing plan and talk about that some, as well as share some of the modifications that we're proposing since we last met in December based on feedback from engaging with the community. So with that, I will hand it off to Erin, if that's okay.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Councilmember, for the opportunity to talk through with you where we are on the proposed updates for the residential incentive program. As you mentioned, there has been a lot of work that has gone in over the years, and just want to give a quick overview of what we've worked on with your office and just update everybody on where we are. As you mentioned, we obviously have, there is no silver bullet for the issues facing our community around housing. And as we look at the growth that's happening in our community, we know that we need to build the housing infrastructure that's going to meet that growing city and make sure that we have opportunities at all income levels and everywhere in our city. We can build the supply, but we also need to be deliberate about preserving our existing affordability. We need to be investing in affordable housing for units that our market rate partners will not bring into the market. And we need to be including everyone in the prosperity of that growth. And when we talk about the CRA policy and we talk about the toolbox around the housing strategy, we know that the CRA is one of those. And when we look at the issues facing our community and where the CRA can be helpful, when we look at the issue, we're facing a housing shortage. We do not have enough housing for it to securely house all the folks in our community, and certainly the folks that are continuing to join us in Central Ohio. When we look at that growth and what that trajectory means, it really is born out of our job creation and the opportunities that are coming into Central Ohio, and where we are adding in the Central Ohio region, not just the city of Columbus, but in our Central Ohio region, we add about 2.5 jobs for every one house we build. When we look at our partners and our peer cities around the nation, a more sustainable level is about 1.5 to 1, where we can maintain that affordability, where we can have opportunities for folks throughout the community, similar to the way Columbus has enjoyed that natural affordability in the decades past. As we continue to grow without keeping our housing commensurate with that growth in population, we continue to have housing scarcity, and that is going to continue to exacerbate the pricing both in rental and in home ownership that we're seeing in our community. Another thing we're seeing in the community is we are seeing individuals and families price out of particular neighborhoods, right? We understand that there are different neighborhoods and different markets in our community, and the opportunity for me to choose anywhere in the city where I want to live is limited by my income in some of these locations. Some of these locations are in places that are proximate to job centers and proximate to opportunities, and we want to make sure that there's opportunities for all income levels to choose those communities, and this is one of those tools that can help us do some of that work. The final piece of it is increasingly expensive to build affordable housing, right? The housing that our affordable housing partners bring into the market to serve those, as you mentioned, the 80% area median income level, we need deliberate investment in those projects so that those units can come online in our community. And it is increasingly expensive, right? Our affordable housing partners are also experiencing increases in land costs. They are experiencing the increases in construction costs and labor, all the things that our other partners are seeing in the housing market, our affordable housing partners are facing as well. So the CRA becomes an important tool as they consider the construction of new affordable housing. And so all that being said, when we think about the goals of the program, I think originally the CRA program was meant to incentivize residential construction. That's really what the tool was originally, considered for. 2018, there was the opportunity for the city to capture additional public policy value, right? There was value that was needed to incentivize the residential construction, but there was some to capture those additional public policy goals. Most importantly, to include units below the market rate rent in those neighborhoods where we're not seeing the market bring those into the community. And then finally, again, just supporting our affordable housing partners as they try to put together financing to bring affordable housing projects into the community. The CRA becomes an important part of that financial package to get those units into the community. And I think, Councilmember, you talked at the beginning really around what those different area median incomes are in our community. And I wanted to put this slide up. When we talk about affordability in Central Ohio, we want to make sure that our residents and families are not paying more than 30% of their income on their housing. I think it's a lot easier to talk a little bit about where folks are in our community and the types of folks that we may be seeing take advantage of the CRA program. And when we look at a registered nurse in Central Ohio, this is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is the mean wage for a registered nurse in Central Ohio, meaning half of nurses in our community earn less and half earn more. And where that he or she is coming in at $73,270 a year, if that person is supporting a family of 4 with their income, they would land into the 80% area median income. Our construction worker, again, the median wage or mean wage for that employee would be $50,000 a year. If that person is an individual and not supporting anyone else in their household, they would also be at the 80% area median income. As we get down to folks in the administrative assistant profession or someone that may be cooking in a restaurant, those folks, if that administrative assistant is supporting a family of 4, he or she would be in the 40% area median income. And the cook in the restaurant at $29,000 as an individual would also then fall in that 40% area median income. So I think it's important to understand, where this program is versus where it's able to add the inclusive units, the units that we're going to talk about a little later, and then where they can also support our families that are below that 80% area median income. And it really does achieve both of those goals. The tax abatement, which, I think we've showed this slide in a number of our public presentations, but it is really just about the cost of construction and the land cost that goes into new development and new construction. There are neighborhoods in our community in the CRA areas where that cost exceeds the revenue that can be captured by the developer. If that revenue can't be captured, that development will not happen, right? They need to be able to recoup the cost, pay debt service, pay for that new development in order to make it something that they're going to take on, right? So the purpose of the residential investment or the tax incentive is to really make sure that we fill that final gap, to make sure that our development partners are continuing to bring those units. Again, thinking about the scarcity of housing and the fact that we're not keeping up with our population growth, it is an important tool to bring units into our community. When we talk about the tax abatement, it is only the abated value of the new improvement. The original taxable value remains on the tax roll during the abatement period, which is of 15 years. So the abated value is simply the improvement, and then only for the period of 15 years. Post year 15, the full tax value is back on the tax roll. And Councilmember, as you mentioned, when 2018, we really looked at the opportunity to capture that additional public policy value, breaking the CRAs into much more nuanced categories: market ready, ready for revitalization, and ready for opportunity. One of the important components of the legislation in 2018 was that we were going to take a look at the program after 3 years. And so what we had the opportunity to do in the Department of Development was take a look at 2 primary questions. One, we needed to look at how the residential markets had changed in the individual CRAs. We know that things are moving quickly in Central Ohio, and it is fast changing markets. And so we needed to make sure that we were on top of what those changes might have been and whether or not there was additional value to capture. The second was just how the 2018 policy had performed. It was a new policy. It was something that was worth taking a look at against what the goals of the program were. When we look at the first question and how residential markets have changed, we worked with Vote Strategic Insights, a economic firm here in town. They took a look at really a cash-on-cash return. Again, going back to that slide, what does it cost to do the construction, and then what are the revenues projected? And we looked at 4 different neighborhoods. We looked at the Short North, we looked at the Near East Side, Hilltop, and the Linden neighborhoods. We had them take a look in the 2021 market, what was the cost of construction, including land costs, in these different CRAs, and then what were the revenues that could be captured from rents in these neighborhoods. The second question really looked at how did the 2018 policy perform. I've updated these numbers. Some of the folks that are in the audience that may have joined us last meeting, we've included these are to-date numbers. We had included just through 21 at the last one. And again, where we had incentivized residential construction between the period of 2018 to 2022, so that's everything from the inception of the policy, it was about 4,500 units that we were able to bring in the community, again, addressing that scarcity issue. We were able to incentivize the inclusion of 731 below market rate rentals, again, including those folks at the 80 and 100% area median incomes in some of the neighborhoods where we're seeing rents rise. And then in addition, almost the same number of affordable units were brought into the community, and those are serving those below the 80% area median income. That is where the abatement is typically paired with low-income housing tax credits, other funding that the city provides to bring those projects out of the ground. Okay, so now we get into the meat of the policy update. So based on the cash-on-cash return that we worked on with Vote, based on just a review of the overall policy, what you'll see here is the very lightest blue is what was in the current policy. What we show in the middle category is really what we had originally proposed as part of this policy update. And then the final column on the right is where you see the updates that we're bringing to you since the community meetings that happened in the fall and the winter. Again, Councilmember, you mentioned we were able to capture a deeper or a wider affordability, and that is true for the market-ready areas as well as ready for revitalization. We were able to restrict the abatement for single-family new construction and renovation to only those homes that would be sold to affordable buyers below 120% area median income. It is not a tool available for market rate new development or renovation of single-family. And then we were able to, we took a look at the 5-story requirement that was in the 2018 policy. We found that it often conflicted with land use policy that the communities had developed, and really realized that that 5-story requirement wasn't appropriately in this policy, but really lived with the land use documents that the communities were a part of creating. And then in the original inception, we looked at the idea that we had been silent in 2018 about the distribution of units. Right, there was not a requirement that there be any sort of distribution that was commensurate with the market rate units, and we have added that language into the policy. All those elements have remained. As we had conversations in the fall and the winter, we have added in the fee in lieu and the opportunity, again, for there to be a relief valve in the code. Because this is a part of code, it is not an opportunity for us to have a chance to mitigate an issue that may occur with a particular project. This would allow, if there is not an opportunity for that developer to include the units for a variety of reasons we may or may not be able to foresee, that we would have that fee in lieu option as a relief valve. We think we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about the math as to how we got to those components, but really making sure that we had that opportunity to really create a space in case that development just wasn't able to include the units, but making sure it was at a value where we would not be encouraging the use of the fee in lieu. Ready for revitalization, almost exactly the same as market ready. The one thing you'll see is we did include the fee in lieu back in for ready for revitalization, is a slightly lower amount commensurate with kind of where the market is for the ready for revitalization areas. And then, when we looked at the fee in lieu, we looked at the market ready neighborhoods had sort of a calculation that was a part of the 2018 policy. And it really was the developer on an annual basis calculating the delta between what they were capturing on the market rate side versus what they would have captured had they included an affordable unit. That delta would have been the fee that they would have had to pay. We did not see any developers take advantage of that, and we have not seen any to date take advantage of that in the market-ready neighborhoods. We have seen developers take advantage of the fee in lieu in the ready for revitalization areas, where the current value is at $5,000 a unit. What we really looked at is we're not seeing the activity in the market ready, so we took that kind of broad idea of the calculation and capturing that delta. And what we did was when we looked at the Vote Strategic Insights data around the rents that they believed were captured in these different areas, when you looked at market ready, $1,800 a month across your project if it was all market rate. If we include the units at 60% and 80%, that overall total drops to $1,670. So the developer, that cost to include those units is about $130 per unit per month. When we look at that over the year one, it would be $1,560 So in the previous 2018 policy, the developer would calculate this each year. What we did was go ahead and annualize it over the course of the 15 years with an escalation of 4.5%. For ready for revitalization, or for market ready, that gets us to $32,000. Ready for revitalization, we increased that fee in lieu amount by more than 3% to more than 3 times to $16,000, which is again commensurate with that delta that we see between a full market rate project versus one that includes the affordability. And then ready for opportunity, this was one, Councilmember, that you really, as we looked at the feedback that went through fall and winter and the opportunity to think about these neighborhoods as quickly changing. What we know about ready for opportunity neighborhoods is the rents are naturally living in the space of 80 and 100% area median income. We will revisit this policy in another 3 years. There is likelihood that those neighborhoods will change in the meantime. And I think it was a really important step in Ready for Opportunity to go ahead and include the affordability requirement so that that mechanism is there if that neighborhood market should change and we need to go ahead and require that affordability. And it's not just naturally occurring in those communities. Same thing, we included the need for it to be a commensurate distribution of units. And then we did include the buyout at $5,000. We looked at this area as an opportunity to really set it at the previous Ready for Revitalization levels at 80% and 100% AMIs. So we kept that buyout similar to what we had seen initially in Ready for Revitalization. So next steps, we certainly have the opportunity to talk with you about the policy this evening. The Department of Development will hold a community meeting next Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. We are going to be at St. Stephen's Community House, and that will be an opportunity for community meeting and conversation about the policy in addition to this evening's public meeting. And then, as always, I've included my contact information. We've certainly heard from a lot of folks and would want to make sure that everyone has my email and my direct phone line if anyone has questions or would like to provide feedback and couldn't participate this evening. So that is the completion of my presentation for this evening, and appreciate the opportunity to walk through that.
Thank you, Ms. Prosser. I think we're going to go ahead and hop right in. We already moved it. It's okay. We'll hop right into the developer fee in lieu. Most of the feedback that I have received thus far has been in response to including the fee in lieu. And candidly, I've never been a fan of the fee in lieu. Asked many questions about how the fee in lieu actually works. It's a very complicated math structure that we have there. But when we see the numbers, 32,000 in the market ready, 16,000 in the ready for revitalization, and now 5,000 in the ready for opportunity, are we talking about the developer paying that one lump sum, or is that per unit? Excuse me, is that per unit?
That would be per unit.
Per unit.
Yes, correct. So for each affordable unit that was required, you would have to pay that fee in lieu. Depending on your CRA area, then that would be the requirement.
Okay. So based upon those fees that could potentially be collected, and you have acknowledged that in the market ready, we have not seen a developer take that fee, which would be $32,000 per unit if a developer decided that would be more cost-effective for them in this situation. It may not even be a cost-effective issue. It could be some other situation there. How will that money be used?
That's a good question. When we look at the 2018 policy, right now the requirement is that fee in lieu go to either a CDC in the City of Columbus or to the Affordable Housing Trust. So Community Development Corporation or the Affordable Housing Trust. It is a fund of money that could be generated that could be rather flexible and really be able to respond to some of the issues we're seeing in these neighborhoods of change, and making sure that we have incorporated in those neighborhoods opportunities for emergency rental assistance as we start to think about where we will be with the federal funding moving forward, and then also home ownership preservation. We want to maintain the mixed income communities. This is a tool that allows us to include units, and that fee in lieu would be an opportunity for us to also preserve the affordability and protect the tenants that are in those communities that are seeing change.
And another ask, and I know I've been asking a lot as it requires of this policy, but I do believe that we're at a pivotal point in our city's history that we must be as aggressive as possible with our housing policies, is for us to also include a third category for that pot, if you will, that serves to provide opportunities for ownership. And so when I look at what these fees could be potentially used for, if we're going to see those fees be collected, is really around stabilization, preservation, and ownership. And so I think that there is a opportunity for us, as we do continue to move forward outside of the pandemic, and recognizing that the emergency rental assistance dollars that we've seen over the past 2 years, those funds are not permanent. And we do need to find a permanent stream to ensure that our residents have the ability to remain in their homes if need be. So how will we know if a developer is actually keeping the units affordable?
That's a great question. We have folks in our housing division in the Department of Development that do work with the developers to ensure compliance. And that compliance is an annual check against what the obligation is based on when the development occurred and what policy they are under, and making sure that they have units at that level available according to the requirements of the policy.
So one of the and does that also include single-family residential units as well, that same type of check? Now that we have the requirement that if you're going to receive an abatement for a single family, it must be deemed affordable. That is a new policy that we're moving forward with. Are we going to be checking those just the same way we would multifamily?
Correct. And so that would be one where, and just like in multifamily, as long as the unit is rented to someone that is in that 80% AMI, for example, if that person then gets a new job and they get a raise from that position, they would be able to stay in the unit and maintain that cost of housing as part of that agreement. They would not be kicked out because they started earning more money. However, once that unit changes over, that unit would then need to be rented again to somebody at 80%. So same with the house, where if you are an 80%, let's say I'm at 100% AMI, I'm able to purchase the home, and then in 5 years I sell it, and the abatement is still in place. That person I sell it to needs to be below that 120% AMI, or the abatement goes away. So I could have the abatement captured for my period of time, and then it could go away if there's a buyer that's not an affordable buyer on the second round. And that compliance would happen again annually, making sure that as those change of hands happen, that there is a check from our department to make sure that that is still in compliance.
You know, I think that I'm grateful that we were able to get to that place with single families, because if we think about how quickly our communities are changing, and the fact that we have single family new construction coming online in communities where we see massive displacement occurring, those should not be opportunities for abatement for abatements to be used in that situation. And so I'm really, for lack of a better word, excited that we are eliminating that opportunity for further displacement and gentrification of our communities through this policy. But why 120%?
So that is a level that is commensurate with some of what we see coming out of the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. When we talk about home ownership, and we also looked at the Community Land Trust, which is doing affordable home ownership, where you look at folks that are able to secure a mortgage for even an affordable housing opportunity, we needed to give a little bit more room into that 120%. It's commensurate with a lot of the other affordable home ownership opportunities, and making sure that we are capturing folks that can, are able to have a mortgage, but then also be an income restricted tenant or resident, homeowner. So really looking at some of our other partners, OFA will go up to 160%. We didn't want to go that high. We really wanted to look at the 120 and commiserate with our partners at the land trust and what they're seeing. Most of the buyers in land trust are below that 120%, but it gives a little bit of flexibility for those developers to capture some of the folks that, may not be, that may be above that level.
And do we have an idea on average where our land trust homeowners generally fall? I know that is well below the 120% area median income.
It is, I would probably be speaking a little bit out of date, but it is, I think it's closer in that 80% area median income.
Okay. Could you tell us how, can you talk to us about what engagement looked like from December to now, June? Who were you all speaking with? What did your community engagement look like? Were you just speaking to developers, or were you also meeting with community as requested?
Correct. So we did have the opportunity in the fall and the winter of last year to host, I think we did 4 community meetings with the Department of Development. There was the opportunity through a council hearing that you hosted, Councilmember, as well, to get that feedback. We were really took that information and the feedback that we got, both written and in testimony that folks provided or conversations that we were having during our community meetings. And we really took that information back within our, within the City of Columbus, specifically with the internal working group, and making sure that we were really understanding what the feedback was and what were the opportunities we could make changes to the policy, but making sure that we were always keeping an eye on right sizing the policy. Right, there are multiple goals for it, and we wanted to make sure that we were continuing to add units into the community and making sure it was still a tool that would incent residential construction. Also making sure that it would capture the affordability in these communities where we're seeing rents rise, and then also remain a good tool for our affordable housing partners. We were able to host a community meeting last week. It was a virtual community meeting. And start to, kind of walk through some of these updates between last fall and now. And again, we're here with you this evening, and then we'll have another one in-person meeting opportunity next week on Tuesday.
So outside the pressures that have been brought on by the pandemic, including construction costs, supply chain issues, why is it so expensive to build affordable?
I mean, I think there is... not just in the construction costs or in the labor costs, but what we're seeing also in Central Ohio is an increase in land cost. And especially when we think about the opportunity to build affordability in neighborhoods where land costs are increasing, where we may not naturally see the opportunity for our affordable housing partners to participate in those areas because of the cost of land in particular. This policy becomes an important part of being able to fold those affordable units into those communities. In a way that we don't often see our affordable housing partners being able to do. Mm-hmm. That is a big change for us in Central Ohio, and really seeing those land costs escalate in addition to all the other things they're facing, not just Central Ohio, but nationally, as we think about bringing housing into online.
And so how can, if we want to get more developers involved in helping to solve our housing crisis, thereby creating more affordable units, can't they just make them affordable outright?
I think that's a really good question, and one that I think we were particularly interested in from the vote information that we received back, looking at where we are from a cost standpoint, but then also looking at where our rents are coming in, right? And where we're seeing about a 5% increase in rent every year, certainly going up. We're not seeing it escalate to the point of being able to capture all the costs associated with new construction. Again, new construction has a lot more that comes alongside of it than sort of an existing building. And so as we want to keep our housing infrastructure built and can commiserate with the people that are coming into our community, that's going to be new construction. And that new construction is just going to be more challenging from a cost standpoint. And then there has to be that revenue, not only to capture just to pay for what was built, right, and to pay that cost, but there's often financing involved and the need to pay for the cost of the dollars, right, and the cost of bringing that financing into the project. All of those pieces and parts are going to start to be a really, quite thin balance between the two. The residential tax incentive is an important part of making sure that those deals come into the community. But for the residential tax incentive in a lot of areas, we wouldn't have that investment being made, or we wouldn't have investment being made at the density and the level to which we're seeing. As you increase from types of construction, as you get into steel construction, the cost just escalates. And the abatement can be an important tool that can bring a much denser project into a community than we would see without the abatement. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but trying to, again, right-size the policy so that it meets the needs of addressing our scarcity in the neighborhoods where we see high opportunity, being able to include units to the best of what we can do right now, and then looking at it again in 3 years from now to see what else we can capture from the abatement policy, I think is a really important kind of gut check as we change as a community and we see our neighborhoods changing, making sure that we are capturing all of that value. But it is still a really necessary tool to just making a deal work in a lot of these areas, or for us to be able to encourage denser, bigger construction where the neighborhood has deemed it appropriate, allowing the abatement to help support something like that so that you can really get as many units as we can into our community.
So if I'm watching this at home and I'm seeing all of the different categories that are now being included, including the 60% area median income category, and I don't see myself included in that category, if I fall well below 60%, we're talking in that 30% to 50% area median income. We know pre-pandemic that we had close to 55,000 folks that fell into that category. We know that those numbers have probably been exacerbated by the pandemic. This policy does not reflect the needs of those residents in our community. What would be your response to what our strategy will be around finding appropriate housing for those individuals?
I think that's also a great question. And I think when you let off about there not being a silver bullet, right, and that this is one of the tools that we have in the toolbox, it is an important part of our affordable housing partners that are bringing units below the area median, 80% area median income is an important tool for them. But that is not the only tool that we're providing to those developers. One of the ways in which we've done it in the last few years is through the $50 million housing bond package that the voters approved in 2019. As we look at the investment of those dollars into those projects that are kind of partnered with low-income housing tax credits and some other public and private dollars, what we saw was the inclusion of another 1,300 units that were brought into the community to serve those folks below the area median income of 80%. Those projects, the max is 80, they average out at 60% area median income and then can go as low as 30. We have also supported those permanent supportive housing projects that are really there to serve those folks that are below the 30% area median income. And so again, building out that toolbox and making sure that we are supporting those units that below the 80% area median income takes a much bigger lift than just the abatement. It's an important part, but we can't capture that level of affordability without partnering it with some other funding sources, including the bond package dollars. So as we want to get into that deeper affordability, we just need more resources to support those projects. The abatement is able to support projects to bring kind of right now, if the new policy were to go into place, the folks that are between 60 and 80. And then we would utilize our other tools to help support the development of units that would support those folks. But the abatement would also be part of that mix as well.
So I think, Erin, Ms. Prosser, you have been here on the job for a little over a year or close to it. When can we expect to see a more detailed, comprehensive housing strategy? Because, we can continue to say all day long that there's no silver bullet, there's so many tools in the toolbox. But I think for residents, there rightfully is concern that we are lacking a strategy for the city of Columbus in preserving what we already have while also growing in an equitable and inclusive way. So when could we expect to see something?
I think that is something that is, coming shortly. I think we've shared a little bit out in the community, as we look at what our housing infrastructure needs and what our housing ecosystem needs, we need more supply. Mm-hmm. So the foundation of all the strategy is just building as much housing as we need to support our residents, right? Mm-hmm. And again, going back to that, we one house for every 2.5 jobs we bring into the community. We need to escalate and accelerate how we're bringing residential into the community so we can meet that need. When we look at our peer cities around the country, when they started to accelerate their residential construction is where they locked in their affordability. We are currently an affordable community, relatively speaking, and the sooner we get to the point where we can match our housing growth with our job creation, the more likely we are to actually just lock in our affordability where we are today. Every year that passes that we don't build enough housing means that we slip further and further back on the affordability, right? We are going to be a city then without the middle, right? And we're going to have a lack of opportunity for folks to just live in our community, live close to work. I say that with the supply is really what can address the issues in the aggregate, right, and in kind of the total region. We also have to be very fine-tuned about how we think about some of the impacts that neighborhoods and neighbors are feeling. I think through preservation and thinking about how we engage with some of the neighborhoods that are changing quickly. We're losing especially a lot of the rental fabric that's affordable. Again, some of the existing units that aren't part of that new construction cost, and the ability to bring those units in as we look towards November and we look towards the opportunity to ask the Columbus voters again to support affordable housing in the bond package. Those would be opportunities to start to look at strategies around the preservation of our existing affordability. Certainly the work that you have done and continue to do around housing for all fits into that preservation and protection of our community and making sure that those who are renting with us in our neighborhoods are protected. And the work you're doing now with just making sure that folks know what those protections are. And that's part of that preservation. Again, back to the investment, we need to invest in affordable housing. There is a cost to construction, and we're going to need to have a public role in making sure that those units come online with our partners that do affordable housing development. And again, looking forward to November and the opportunity that an additional housing bond package could give us in supporting not just the 1,300 units, but continuing that effort as we move forward. And then making sure we're including everyone, making sure that these conversations extend to our regional partners, the jurisdictions outside the city of Columbus. This is a regional issue, and we're all interested in kind of having a collective conversation. And that's how we're going to be ultimately successful in not only preserving our existing affordability, but building in housing that supports those residents that support our community.
Councilmember,
Yes.
if I may, Aaron did a nice job kind of going through that strategy. I want to talk about some of the tactical things we're doing on implementing that. So we need to build more units and more homes in the region. We are engaging with city managers and mayors throughout the region on the importance of housing and the housing need and why the communities around the region need to see where they fit into this. I know the mayor's been leading on that, and he's had Aaron out a couple times talking to that group. We're also in the process of updating our zoning code, which is going to streamline our process to continue to add housing units, to build the density we need, to put it in those transit corridors that connect housing with jobs. That is really important, and that is something that is ongoing. When we talk about preservation, our housing division now is running an emergency home repair system. We are doing roof repairs. We are helping people stay in their homes so they can keep that affordability. As we talk about going forward with additional dollars, that funding that at a higher level is going to be really important to stop displacement. And the last thing is the voters approved $50 million in a bond levy, and we have allocated or committed that full $50 million to projects that the market won't support, and mostly the 4% LIHTC deals. And if my number is correct, off the top of my head, it's about 3,200 units is as a result. 1,300. I'm optimistic. I want to get to 3,200. It's 1,300, but it has leveraged over $100 million in additional investment. So we have a plan. We're tactically implementing that plan, and I think this is a tool that helps that. And your leadership and support, especially the Housing for All work, is really framed it in a way that we're including everybody and making sure, with the pandemic, we got a lot of federal resources, and we're doing a lot around the rental assistance, but we know those federal resources are going to end at some point, and we need to find ways to put more money out there for our community so people can stay in their homes. I love the point you made about using that pot of money from the fee in lieu for home ownership, and we agree with that, and we'll be talking about that going forward of how that pot will be used. But I'll also tell you, just outside the fee in lieu of, we're going to find other regional dollars that we can put into home ownership and help our residents build wealth that way. So there's some very tactical things we're doing now to address those concerns.
Thank you, Director and Ms. Prosser. We will move forward with the public testimony portion of the hearing. Just as a reminder, please come to the podium, state your name, any organization that you might represent. You will have 3 minutes. At the conclusion of 3 minutes, there will be a gentle reminder that your time has concluded. And we have 7 speakers that will be providing testimony this evening. The first one is Mr. Joe Motil. Welcome back to Council, Mr. Motil.
Excuse me. Yeah, Joe Motil, 167 West Cook Road, Columbus, Ohio. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Hello? Yes? Everybody hear me? Okay. Good. Thank you, Councilwoman Favor, for holding this public hearing. And unfortunately, because the power was out in my home, I had to handwrite my testimony and my Yeah. All right. And so, yeah, I can hear myself now too. Yeah, and by the way, yeah, I had to handwrite this, so my handwriting's atrocious. I can barely read it myself. So anyways, first of all, I just want to be clear that the 54,000 units that we're always talking about, people paying 50% or more of their income, that comes from a study that was done 5 years ago. And I think, as you indicated earlier, we can all agree that that number is far greater now than it was then. When the public hearing on CRAs was held last November, I was told that the new policy recommendations would probably be made by January or February of 2022, and it's now 4 to 5 months later. And myself and others suspect that this was mostly done due to the result of heavy lobbying efforts on behalf of the development community and their high-priced, politically influential lobbyists and campaign contributions. Developers are all in tune when it comes to giving the same message. They all claim there's a shortage of housing. We know that, but we need to build all types of housing, not just affordable. These are their words. The fact is, and they know it, that no less than 80% of all the housing is on the high end, and truly affordable housing at 60% AMI and less is what is truly needed. I don't see college kids living on the streets because they can't find housing. The majority of housing is being built to satisfy the mid and high income level employees, high income level employers, labor pool of corporate Columbus and our longtime established institutions like OSU and nationwide. For instance, the president of Kaufman Development recently stated, quote, "We're incredibly supportive of affordable housing. Yet Kaufman and other City Hall favored market rate developers want the buyout because in the long term, they're going to make more money. They talk out of both sides of their mouths, but are truly only concerned about higher profit margins." Mayor Ginther stated, and I quote, "We have to make sure that everybody who works in our community can live here too." And the Columbus Partnership talks about, quote, "raising the bar to achieve equity." And I'm still waiting on a reply from the Columbus Partnership and its 82 members to put their money where their mouth is and to establish their own affordable housing trust fund and $60 million in matching ARP funds that the city and county should be allocating for 60% AMI affordable housing. Once again, I urge you to exclude the buyout, and rather than allow for 30% of the units at 80% AMI instead of 10% at 60 and 10% at 80, I believe it is more important to include a formula that includes 60 and 80% AMI at 15 each. So instead of the 80, 15% at 60% AMI, 15% at 80% AMI instead of the 3 at 80. Because it's really more important that some of the units be provided for those with incomes of $35,220. And I scribbled down some things as we were talking. It seems like I have a few more seconds left or whatever, but consider putting a ceiling on single-family home tax abatements at perhaps $250,000 to $300,000. Who in the world needs a tax break if they can afford to buy a home for $500,000 or a condo at Parks Edge worth $1,900,000, $800,000, $700,000? Nobody needs a tax break if they can afford those types of homes. The fee in lieu, because the developers, I disagree with what was being said, because I think if you do away with the fee in lieu, that you're taking away the opportunity to put in more low-income housing, 60% AMI, in those market rate and ready for revitalization areas, and it's not going to reoccur. You're not going to be able to ever do it if you don't do it now. By just putting that money into a pot and saying, okay, we're going to put this money towards affordable housing in this area or wherever, you're taking away an opportunity to increase the 60% AMI in those neighborhoods. Thus, you're creating more economic segregation for housing in those areas. And one more thing, I wouldn't hang my hat too much on the 2019 $50 million bond package. It's been depleted, as we all know, since early this year, and it should have been at least 3 to 4 times that amount when it was first put on the ballot. We have no bond package money now. So we haven't had it, as far as I know, Director Stevens, since January. So that money's gone, and we won't have any till probably sometime next year. Thank you. I'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Motil. Ms. Prosser, let's address the comment around the ceiling for single family.
Correct. In the policy revisions as we proposed, that home ownership opportunity would only be extended the abatement if the buyer is below 120% of the area median income.
So the
that is a
likelihood that they'll
change.
get a $500,000 home is very
Correct.
low.
So that abatement would only extend if that buyer is an affordable buyer, which is a change from the current policy.
Correct. There was also, did you have a comment around that? Or a question around that?
I think that was it.
Okay. Mr. Motil also mentioned or had a question around the time frame, approximately 6 months from the last time over here. I know I asked about what engagement looked like. If you could just go into greater detail about what that like. Were you guys hanging out with developers?
If it's okay, Chair Favor, I'll answer that because I have to take some of the responsibility on the delay in that. We hit the brakes back in December to have more engagement. Didn't want to feel like, and got good feedback from the community of let's not introduce this, have a week between meetings, and then make some modifications. So we waited, we stepped back. We did some engagement beyond just the public meetings. I know Erin has done a nice job going out and talking to different housing stakeholders in our community, and I know she's joined you at times as well. And we lost some of the momentum we had going into December. There's multiple priorities out there as we're working on advancing different housing agenda items. This one just, the urgency fell back, and I'll own responsibility on that. The team that worked on it, a lot of work was put into, okay, if we do a fee in lieu of, because we got a lot of feedback on that as well in the fall and winter, what does that look like? And it needed to be substantial, because if someone's going to choose to do a fee in lieu of, I want them to think really hard about whether or not that makes the most sense for them financially as a business, because those units are really important. So we spent quite a bit of time on that as well, and getting working through the math on that and what makes the most sense. So, but again, some of the urgency slowed down. I'll take responsibility for that, and I apologize, but it wasn't anything beyond that.
And Ms. Prosser, in your explanation of how the fee in lieu would actually operate, you mentioned there being the need for a relief valve. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Correct. I think when you look across the last few years with the fee in lieu, Again, we didn't have anyone take it in the market-ready areas. Where we saw it was the ready for revitalization, and initially really seeing it with projects that were particularly small, where you saw folks that were doing some of the work that we think is really important in our neighborhoods and bringing some of this kind of gentle density middle market housing into our communities. To be able to incorporate the affordability on a smaller project becomes challenging, not just from a feasibility standpoint, but just administratively and from that compliance standpoint. That was really where we saw, we see a little bit of escalation recently, and I think that is because we need to right-size the value. And so where we are able to update it in the 2022 policy to make it, again, commensurate with where we weren't seeing it utilized very much is really the goal, because we want to include those units. But there are going to be projects that we can't necessarily foresee that will need the opportunity that we can't, if we don't build it into the code, we won't be able to do it from an administrative standpoint. And so again, trying to right-size it so that, one, it was not something that was the automatic option that our developers would take, that we continue to see the inclusion of units. Again, 731 units at 80 and 100% that were produced over the last number of years with the policy. That's really what we want to see, right? Where those opportunities, the slide I showed in the beginning, where that registered nurse has the opportunity to live in the Short North neighborhood if he or she chooses and work at the Wexner Medical Center, right? That we are close to job opportunities, that we're providing those inclusive units is really the priority. But again, we're not able to forecast entirely what every project will be able to do or not do. And it's important because we to build that into the code so that we have the opportunity to react if a project can't do it. But the guiding force was that we want those units included in those communities to create that mixed income community that this policy can help us with.
And let's be clear, the buyout in the old policy was $5,000,
Correct.
right? So now we're looking at $16,000 if we're talking about the same category.
Correct.
Per unit that would be required under the abatement policy, correct?
Deleted it more than 3 times.
More than, okay.
I guess I just want, we want to still be able to maintain housing for service workers at $35,000. And that's why we
Absolutely.
60%, at least 50%.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Motil. Next, we have Isaiah Backgall. I apologize if I mispronounced.
Thank you. Good to be back. Okay, sorry, one second. Hi, my name is Isaiah Backgall. I'm a member of Sunrise Columbus, which is a youth-led climate justice organization. Just want to say ditto to what Mr. Motil said. Yeah, hi, Councilwoman Favor. Thank you for hosting this hearing. When you held the hearing last December, we asked you to pause this process until the community has had a meaningful opportunity to shape the updated tax abatement policy. We asked for a democratic and transparent process. Instead, we received months of silence until 2 weeks ago when Ms. Prosser emailed us with updates to the policy and little time to prepare for meetings such as this one. One of the most egregious additions to the policy is the inclusion of the buyout option, which permits developers to get out of constructing any affordable housing in exchange for paying a small fee. Clearly, developers have been given ample time to make their concerns heard and influence the outcome of this policy and the allocation of public funds. The city states that the tax abatement policy is the method by which the city incentivizes the construction of affordable housing. But I have to wonder why. In what world does it make sense to offload constructing affordable housing to private developers whose only goal is profit? Especially when the tax abatement policy allows said developers to eschew their responsibilities to build affordable housing. It takes no imagination to understand that we are in a crisis. Thousands of households are out of power and facing 100 degrees of heat, and poor communities are hit the hardest. It's only the beginning of summer. This is a climate crisis, a health crisis, and a housing crisis, and we cannot afford to continue letting for-profit corporations, whether they are developers or utility companies, control the city. We are literally paying for it with our lives. We've heard repeatedly today that there is no silver bullet, which seems like a pretty obvious statement and obscures the reality that we are shooting ourselves in the foot. We've also heard today that the point of the CRA is to close the gap on construction costs, which confuses me because I thought that the point was to build affordable housing. And we've heard concern for our residents that are getting pushed out of their communities. Giving developers the money to continue building luxury apartments and gentrify neighborhoods is surely not the solution. We've seen this in Columbus, and we've seen this around the country. So I would ask that the City Council and the Department of Development seriously reimagine their priorities. I have not had time to finish this because power's been out for 2 days and it's been a lot. I appreciate you asking what is our housing plan, because that's what I'm wondering too. It seems like what we have now, or the lack of a plan that we have now, is not working. So thank you again for this time.
Any response, Ms. Prosser or Director Stevens?
Just appreciate the commentary and took some notes and look forward to continuing the conversation.
And, as I stated back in the winter, I've always been committed to community engagement as much as possible. I think we heard Director Stevens acknowledge some missteps is that an accurate word to use, over the winter, with just it falling out of, I won't say priority for the department, but.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I would say, yeah, the urgency fell, but it's not fair for me to say that and not acknowledge the work that Aaron has been doing the last 6 months on developing that strategy, on making sure that more residential units are being built in our region and our city, looking at how are we going to preserve the existing affordability? Mm-hmm. What are we going to do to invest where market rate developers aren't building on affordability? Mm-hmm. And then what are we doing on inclusion? And talked a little earlier about, we have programs in place beyond the 4% support. The support we're providing to those 4% low-income tax credit projects, the emergency housing repair programs we're running, our home programs, our lead HUD-funded program that helping keep people stay in their house. So, Aaron, that's probably the biggest thing over the last 6 months from when we were last here, was Aaron talking about that overall plan on addressing the need to bring more units to our whole region. And mm-hmm. I did this in December. I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about that. This is a regional crisis and it needs a regional solution. Aaron shared that we're adding 2.5 jobs for every new housing unit being built. That's a regional number. In Columbus, we're about 1.8. So we're a little bit lower than that. We're a little bit higher than we want to be, but we're keeping up, almost keeping up on the production of homes throughout the region, especially as we see investments from companies like Hyperion and Intel happening. Communities throughout the region need to be doing more to make sure housing's being built and the supply is there to keep that price at an affordable level for all our workers in our community.
So let's talk about how quickly will we know, and when I say we, I mean really the department, know if you got the math right? Like when we think about the fee in lieu, if we see, tons of developers taking the fee in lieu, then we know we got it wrong, right? And that means we need to be thinking about how this policy needs to be revisited and updated much quicker than 3 years. Is that an accurate statement?
Correct. And I think we have the opportunity to revisit the policy at any point. We don't have to wait till the 3 years. If there is the implementation of the policy and we do see consequences or outcomes that were not what we were hoping for, we have the opportunity to revisit the policy at any point.
Okay.
So, Councilmember, the last 3 years, 4 years, with the existing policy, we've abated approximately a little over 4,500 units based on the numbers Aaron shared today. So that would bring us set aside about 900 units. We're over 1,400 units set aside. So we're even exceeding the 20% that's getting set aside. And that's because our affordable housing partners have taken advantage of those abatements and been building those units and those projects that have that permanent supported housing component, which is really critical for members of our community.
Thank you.
If that number declines and we're seeing less than 20% set aside, that means we
Then we have a problem.
need to look at the buyout number.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Isaiah. Next, we have Leslie Hempson. Hi, welcome to council.
Thank you. Let me move this way down. Yep, so my name is Leslie Hempson. I'm with the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. I've been involved with this process since November, when the Department of Development released its initial proposed update. And I guess the thing that I've heard at all of the meetings that I've attended is something along the lines of, trust us. You know, we've done our homework, we've consulted the experts, we've consulted members of the community, we're doing the best we can. And the problem here, and it's a really big problem, is that we don't trust the Department of Development. I would be willing to bet that the vast majority of people in this room who do not work for the Department of Development do not trust it to do the things that it says it's trying to do with this policy. And I was just writing down a few reasons why that was so as I was listening to the testimony earlier, and we're familiar with all of them, but I just want to repeat a few of them right now because I really think they're worth attending to. So one of our problems is that the Department of Development's tax abatement policy is defunding schools to the tune of $51 million last year. It's also defunded other city services like libraries, which are the rock stars of the last 24 hours in Columbus, to the tune of something like $16 million a year. One of the things that a lot of the speakers have been bringing up is this buyout option. It's insane that we have an affordable housing policy that permits developers to buy their way out of creating affordable housing, sometimes for as little as $333 a year. You can't build a wooden shack for $333 a year. I mean, and another thing that occurs frequently is that the Department of Development employs a definition of affordable housing that doesn't make sense to regular people. Right now, according to the department's definition, an affordable two-bedroom apartment is one for which people pay $1,900 a month. That's crazy. There's no one in this city I know who thinks that $1,900 a month in rent is affordable. You also asked the department about accountability, and I want to raise just one example, and that's the example of Colonial Village. We all know about Colonial Village. The city has sued Colonial Village. An environmental court judge has ordered that a number of the apartment units there be boarded up because they're not fit for habitation. And guess what? It's tax abated. The Department of Development and its tax abatement policy has subsidized the destruction of housing units. It has subsidized subjecting many, many tenants of Colonial Village to really severe mental and physical harm. People there have lived with black mold in their walls, with holes in their ceilings, with electricity conditions that don't work, and that has been subsidized by the Department of Development's tax abatement policy. The department says that every year it checks, to make sure that developers and landlords are keeping to their end of the bargain. It didn't identify a problem with Colonial Village until the early months of 2021. And that gives me and it gives a lot of people in this community pause when we hear the Department of Development tell us that it's going to make sure that developers and landlords keep up their end of the bargain. We don't believe that. I want to return to a point that a lot of people have been bringing up, and that's the buyout option. You said at the beginning of the hearing that you've been skeptical about it, and I appreciate that. And I guess I just want to ask you a little bit more directly. Do you support the department's decision to reinsert the buyout option? If you do, why do you support it? And if you don't, what steps are you personally taking to make sure that it doesn't find its way into the final form of legislation? And additionally, what can we do as members of the public, people who have shown up at a time when we don't have power, in order to support you, presuming it is a priority for you to ensure that the buyout option goes away? That's it for me.
Thank you, Ms. Hempson. There were a lot of issues that were brought up, but let's address an issue that hasn't come up yet, which is Colonial Village and the abatement that it had. And I think historically we need to provide some context there because we are talking about two different types of policies that was operating under, that Colonial Village was operating under versus what we're talking about here today. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Correct, and I think we had the opportunity to chat about this as well. With the instance of Colonial Village, that was an abatement that they had applied for based on the renovation to the building. It met the requirements at the time for that abatement. As it went through the receivership process, which was part of what the city had initiated with that property, that abatement remained on as part of the portfolio so that it could be transferred to a new owner, which I think is in process. But that was part of the tool that we had to remain in place in order through that receivership process, but it was in compliance with what the terms of the abatement in that renovation were at the time.
Thank you, Chair Favor. Also with regards to Colonial Village, we have been working with our colleagues in code enforcement and the city attorney's office to address some of the concerns and issues around current ownership and the neglect of that housing project. And through the city attorney's action and code enforcement, the courts have ordered that the ownership change. And we've been talking to as the courts have been working through that process, we've been talking to potential owners and emphasizing the importance to invest in the site and maintain the security at the site, but also maintain the affordability. So it is one that is of great concern, and we'll continue to work with our partners in code enforcement and city attorney's office to make sure issues are addressed.
And I would say, Ms. Hempson, I stand by the statement I made earlier. I have never loved a buyout, fee in lieu, whatever you want to call it. My sentiment still remains the same, but I also understand that we are operating in different times these days. I understand that construction costs are absolutely ridiculous. I understand that the supply chain has really changed the way we are building in our community. And if we weren't building enough before the pandemic, we definitely aren't building enough right now. And so when I reconcile all that I have advocated for to be included in this policy against what has now been presented before me, I don't love it. But I'm trying to find a way to be okay with it, understanding that we need a permanent stream of income to ensure that people are not further displaced and or evicted in our community. The federal dollars that we have received have brought some comfort into our community, but the reality is that we don't have a long-term strategy to keep that up. Just this past Monday, we legislated, close to $10 million more dollars towards emergency rental assistance. There's no way we can keep that up. And so we do need to be thinking, and I've been thinking about what is Columbus's long-term strategy, because long after these federal dollars are gone, we're still going to be dealing with the remnants of the pandemic, which include evictions, which include people still going to environmental court because they can't keep up with the code issues on their home or not even being able to afford a home. So that's where I'm at right now. I have not made a final decision on where I'm sitting, but that's what I'm trying to reconcile at this point in time. And it has nothing to do with me speaking with developers.
Okay, that's fine. Just one more question for you. On your end, I know that you were entertaining the idea of releasing a sort of Housing for All 2.0. Is that still on the table? And if so, when should we expect to hear about that?
Well, it's in my announcements at the end of the hearing this evening. But just to give you a preview, June 29th. Right? Yes, June 29th. All right, next we have Eli Bonhart. Welcome to council.
Thank you, Councilmember Favor, for holding this hearing today. I'm Eli Bonhart. I'm a member of the West Scioto Area Commission. But I just need to share that my testimony as an individual does not represent the area commission as a whole. I appreciate the changes that have been made and proposed in this 2022 policy recommendations to include units being set aside for the 60 and 80% AMI instead of the previous 80 and 100%. The cost of living, especially rent, has become a large burden for families in Columbus and has continued to grow at a rapid pace due to a variety of economic factors. As someone who currently is paying over 30% of their income for rent, I personally understand what it's like to try to make that payment every month and reconcile that with my other bills. These changes are a step in the right direction, and I hope they spur further development in our area. We don't have nearly enough housing here in Columbus, and it's really difficult for a lot of folks right now to find housing that's affordable and safe. I agree with the removal of the height requirements on the market-ready areas, as we need to ensure that the housing we're building matches the environment it is in. Many parts of town are better suited to have 3 or 4 floors. Some areas are good with 5, but I think we need to be very conscious of putting requirements on that. But I would say I think a 3-floor requirement for multifamily housing is a good solution here, as we need to build dense environments in our community. I think it's important to remember that for folks that do not meet the 100% AMI, rent is still a hard economic cost for them. We need to build more housing quickly as possible and be purposeful in creating dense, livable neighborhoods where working folks can afford to live, whether they are at 30% AMI or 100% AMI.
Thank you. Mr. Bonnert, right? I apologize. Any response from the department for Mr. Bonnert?
Nope, just appreciate the feedback and took some good notes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonnert. Next, we have Ms. Martina Bliss.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Martina Bliss. I am a Columbus resident and live on the Near East Side. Tax abatements are extremely harmful for existing communities in my neighborhood and beyond. The CRA policy in place and the 2022 recommendations do not go far enough and ultimately will not benefit Columbus families, renters, and first-time homebuyers. Tax abatement policies overall hurt our public school system. Columbus children are provided a worse education due to the CRA policy. Our public schools are underfunded, and due to these tax incentives, Columbus City Schools loses millions of dollars a year. Renters are at a constant risk of being priced out of their neighborhoods. Last week, I was at a Near East Side Area Commission meeting where several developers presented plans that fell under the Residential Abatement Policy. The average income on the Near East Side is around $33,000 a year. One of the proposed developments was composed mostly of 435 square foot apartments that would be priced around $1,000 a month. That is not affordable for folks in the neighborhood. Renters have been priced out in many Columbus neighborhoods due to massive increases in new housing development projects, but where are these people going to go? What guarantees them that they won't be priced out of their next neighborhood? First-time homebuyers are facing very similar issues. We are living in a housing crisis, and it's not a lack of housing, it's a lack of affordable housing. The GAP report, released jointly by the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio and the National Low Income Housing Coalition, shows an extreme deficit of affordable housing in Columbus, Ohio, where we have about 73,000 extremely low-income renter households, but only 24,000 affordable and available rental units. That's a deficit of nearly 50,000 units. Individuals in the extremely low income bracket are bearing nearly all the brunt of this severely cost burden and are in constant threat of facing imminent houselessness. The policy recommendations will not help in meeting these demands. It does not provide any incentives for housing developments at or below the 50% AMI, and it offers developers a buyout option. This policy will likely create a larger gap where more and more Columbus residents will be at risk of being priced out, evicted, or becoming homeless. Just last week, 171 evictions were filed in Franklin County. The CRA policy and the new recommendations incentivizes gentrification in Columbus's poorest neighborhoods, leading to the displacement of residents and families. When considering affordability, it should not be done citywide. What is affordable to individuals in Upper Arlington is extremely different from what is affordable to individuals in Bronzeville. Columbus is the 4th most economically segregated city in the US. This only exacerbates the difference in affordability. Like the project I spoke on earlier that was before my area commission meeting last week, it is not affordable for the residents of the Near East Side, and it should not be marketed as such or receive abatements. And on a similar note, there is an apartment complex that was just built just down the street from me on the corner of Hamilton and Broad Street. They received 100% tax abatement. And the cheapest unit in that building is a little over $1,000 a month. I think it's around $1,100. The building has been completed for about 6 months now, and maybe 20% of those units are filled. So they're unable to even fill these housing complexes that are getting abatements because people just can't actually afford to live there. I cannot stress enough that with a deficit of 50,000 affordable units for our most financially vulnerable populations, this plan does not even scratch the surface of addressing the housing crisis. Before I close, I'd like to thank Councilmember Favor for advocating today on behalf of the residents of Columbus concerns, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bliss. So, Ms. Prosser, one thing I thought it would be, I think we need to clarify, because Ms. Bliss mentioned that a citywide policy, but we should probably bring some clarification on actually how our policy operates.
Yes, I'd be happy to. So when we look at the CRA areas within the city, it is not the totality of the city, and it is just certain areas that have been designated to need that additional incentive to bring that residential construction into the neighborhoods, and it is part of the requirements under the Ohio Revised Code. And that
So-
map is available on the Development Department website if you're interested in where those different areas are.
So like the highest level, if you will, the market ready, that would be the Short North neighborhood and
West.
5th by Northwest. That middle tier category would be the Near East Side. I'm drawing a blank. The South Side. It's the bulk of some of our communities.
Correct.
And then the lower tier would be Linden and Franklinton.
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Bliss. Next, we have Ethan Young. Well, y'all not gonna clap for Ethan? That's not right. Welcome, Ethan.
Sorry, actually.
Oh.
My name is Scott. Ethan filed the email for me because I was at work and I couldn't.
Well, see, that's why they didn't clap for you.
So, okay. So, my name is Scott. I'm with the Columbus chapter of the Columbus Communist Party. I would like to thank City Council and Councilwoman Favor for the opportunity to speak on this most important of issues. Affordable housing is a very personal thing for me, and not necessarily in the way that we all need a roof over our heads. No, affordable housing, or rather the lack thereof, has affected me and my family greatly. I wanted to call attention to one aspect of the tax abatements, specifically the low end of the so-called AMI scale. At 60% AMI, or about $35K yearly income, this number, frankly, erases people like my family, who make significantly less than this. I stand before you today to testify on behalf of my family and those like us who represent, in reality, what you refer to as below 60% AMI. Growing up in Columbus, and specifically on the west side, my family experienced severe housing insecurity. As a single parent, my mother constantly had to fight to keep a roof over our heads. 3 evictions in just as many years, starting when I was 13. If not for the kindness of individual members of our church congregation, we likely would have been literally out on the streets. However, my personal story is neither remarkable nor unique, but sadly represents the experiences of many members of our community. If these abatements continue in this form, even with the proposed changes, where would my family have lived? Perhaps this represents a red line being drawn. The numbers are not so much important to me, and it feels like the city's reliance on cold numbers serves to obfuscate the reality of warm bodies on the streets of Columbus. I would like to ask City Council to please consider that while they aggregate data and rely on percentages, human beings with limited or no access to housing are dying. Will there be tax incentives to house these human beings? The data may tell the story that it is not sustainable to provide housing for people at levels below 60% AMI, which is about 30% of the population of Columbus, according to most recent census data. However, there are 2 sides to every story, and the other side of the story is that human beings are suffering, and some will die. Please allow me to relate a personal anecdote. One day last winter, I was getting gas at the Marathon on Hudson Street. A man walked up to me and asked for a ride. As he was getting in my car, I noticed his hand was bandaged. It turned out His fingers had frozen while he was sleeping outside. He had to have them amputated. Is this the city we want to live in? A city that continues to pretend these human beings don't exist? A city that continues to pretend that ameliorating their very real suffering just isn't consistent with the data? We recommend including all, not just CRAs, the CRAs, but all of Columbus in this so-called AMI index. Public control of all subsidized housing, and I feel like this goes without saying at this point, but getting rid of the fee in lieu. I have a little more. I would like to ask the community to imagine a different future for the city, one in which every person enjoys a safe and stable home. What would it be like to live in that city? What kinds of human development might be possible in those circumstances? We are all aware that housing lies at the root of so many of our chronic social problems. And as we work towards true housing for all, and not just those who have means, we build a community for all. That's the Columbus that I want to live in. And I ask on behalf of the working people of the city, to those of you who enjoy the privilege of serving this community, to commit yourselves to this goal of housing for all. You hold the tools and resources to help this dream of a better future turn into reality. And we are all watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Oh, I'm sorry.
Gan, it's fine. I'd rather be him anyway.
My apologies. Thank you for your testimony this evening. You made a note, and I thought it was important for us to acknowledge that when we generally are talking about projects that fall within the tax abatement policy, we fail to forget that we have many projects that are deemed wholly affordable that would not be able to come online if it were not for this policy that's in place. Many of those projects are done by developers like the CHN, remind me of the name. Community Housing Network, which provides permanent supportive housing, 30% AMI and below.
For the permanent supportive.
Go ahead. You got it. Go ahead.
Yes, for the permanent supportive housing projects, that would be 30% below, or 30% or below the area median income. And then, yes, I showed a slide earlier, over 700 of the units that we brought online with the incentive were built as part of those projects that cannot exceed the 80% of area median income and average out at 60% of the area median income.
So, actually last winter, we had two of those projects, one by National Church Residents, which is completely a 60% AMI project, maybe close to 200 units, one by Herman and Kittle, another developer, 200 plus units, 60% completely. So I know that we're thinking that it is only the big developers that are only focused on market rate. But the reality is that we have many affordable projects that are completely affordable that would not be able to come online if it were not for the abatement policy. The other point that I would make, and I would ask you to make some remarks along this line, is that many of those projects could not come online without this abatement policy, but also with tax credit assistance that comes through the Ohio Housing Financing Agency. And unfortunately, Columbus has been trending in the wrong direction with getting projects approved. Can you talk about why that's occurring?
Sure, and I think we look at the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is administered by the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, and they have two parts of the program. One is called a 9% and one is called a 4%. The 9% is very valuable and makes a project not need as many of the different financing tools to come into the marketplace, right? And so it's a similar type of product where you're not exceeding 80% but averaging out at 60% on the units. And that valuable 9% credit, we don't see a lot of those coming into the Columbus community. And as we continue to advocate, speaking about the toolbox and the different tactics, really drilling down with the folks in our housing division to understand why those 9% are not coming into our community, and making sure that we're doing as much advocacy as we can do at the state level to make sure that we are capturing those projects as our population continues to grow. So that's an effort that we've undertaken in the Department of Development. And then thinking about the housing bond package that was passed in 2019, that has really helped us shore up those 4% projects. So 4% are non-competitive, but they're less valuable. So we need to pair those with a lot of other funding sources in order to get those projects to come into our community and be part of that affordable housing portfolio. So we are able to pair that bond funding with the 4% low-income housing tax credit project investment, and then alongside the abatement. And that's not even all the hands that have to be stacked to make those deals come out of the ground. There's additional funding from our partners at Franklin County. They're often looking at other non-traditional financing mechanisms because it's extremely challenging to get them out of the ground. And really, the 9% are our best shot, but they are competitive. And our department is continuing to advocate at the state level to make sure that we are capturing as many of those units as we can, as we are a growing city and we know that we have that continued need that's coming into our community.
But to the point that was made earlier, tonight we're focusing on the policy that's presented before us, but that's why I asked the question about the strategy, because it feels like we're putting all of our eggs in this basket. And so tension feels high. People feel very worried, and likely so, that this is the only thing that we have to hang our hat on around ensuring that we are making sure that the folks that fall below 50%, and I know that you don't really feel comfortable dealing with those numbers, but that's how HUD has it set up. So for lack of better terminology, right now we'll continue to use that, but making sure that we have a strategy in place to deal with folks that would fall into that category. And, and Ms. Bliss didn't address this yet, but I know that she advocates strongly for folks who are experiencing homelessness. And that's something that we haven't spoke broadly about this evening. That's where I'm thinking holistically and comprehensively that we have to have a housing strategy for the city of Columbus. And as we continue to grow, that we're growing equitably, ensuring that it is truly housing for all of us, so.
Just a quick, really quick question, I'm sorry. So we talked about how the tax abatements that we're talking about here enable the other, the other developers, I think it was CHN, you said, to build housing at non-market rates, right? So that means that we can't afford, the city of Columbus, the only city that's projected in the Great Lakes mega region that's projected to grow in the next 10 years. We just can't afford to house 30% of our population. Otherwise, is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean funding more CHN projects?
Yeah, because it sounds like, because when you say that the tax abatements allow the these projects to be built, and these developers to build these projects, it sounds to me like the abatements, the revenue that's being generated is being used to subsidize these lower income houses.
Well, there has to be subsidies included in the project in order for it to be at an affordable rate. Right.
So
I think I might be missing your question then. Are you getting it?
The only thing I would add is, it really is an opportunity for a lot of those different subsidies. In order to get to that level of affordability, the cost of construction is exactly the same, right? The wood costs the same, labor costs the same, and oftentimes our land is quite expensive. That cost of construction is the same. And so when we ask our partners to look at bringing an affordability component into the project, right, and bringing an affordable housing project into our community, we do stack hands, right? I mean, there is a cohesive effort to bring as many of those resources to bear so we can bring those units online. Part of it is our bond funding, right, where we're making a direct grant into that project to make sure that those rents stay at the level that we've required around the affordability. Franklin County brings in their magnet fund, and they're able to grant dollars into the project, all of which is dropping that operational requirement for the community, for that project. But in addition, that's simply just not going to be enough to get that deep affordability that we're looking for. So we also have the opportunity to layer on a reduction in the operation costs around the tax abatement.
And one thing we didn't also talk about is that majority of those projects, if we are truly talking about a permanent supportive housing project, wraparound services. You cannot have a project that would fall into that category without ensuring that there are services that are connected to that project so that folks that are in those units have the ability to remain and can be successful in turning lives around if need be. So yeah, hopefully we got kind of to the crux of your question. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have John Melkai. Good afternoon and welcome back to council.
Thank you, Councilmember. John Melkai on behalf of the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio. Councilmember, as you're aware, the BIA has existed for nearly 80 years representing the residential construction industry throughout the region. Our membership is made up of multifamily and single-family home builders and developers, both on the market rate and affordable housing side. We appreciate the work that you and council have done along with the administration in bringing us to this point today. While the BIA may not agree with all elements of the proposal, we've appreciated the opportunities to come before you and engage and to express our concerns as we move forward. I deviate from what I'd written down just to make a brief remark, and that is, in terms of the fee in lieu option that has existed under the current policy, I believe it's been shown through numbers the vast majority of developments that have occurred in the CRAs have attempted to comply with the affordability option within the CRAs. Very few projects have taken the fee in lieu option, and that's because our developers, to the extent that they can and a project is feasible, want to deliver affordability for council, for the city, and for our residents. We may deviate and say that the proposal today is a significant increase for our membership, but one that they're going to continue to try to work and make accommodations for and continue to build within the region. I want to point out specifically to your point on affordability and challenges in the supply chain. We've had a 35% increase in construction costs since the pandemic, 19% over the last 12 months alone, $19,000 per single family home on lumber. For every $1,000 a home goes up in our region, 1,000 people are priced out. That's a concern for our membership. One specific point we would like to address and offer for consideration is increasing the AMI threshold in the single family market from 120% AMI as it has been proposed to 150% AMI, which we believe brings us more in line with OFA. Currently, the construction gap, we're concerned that at 120% AMI, we simply will not be able to build a home that can be sold at that level right now. We don't think that somebody will be able to qualify on a brand new construction home at 120% AMI with rising interest rates. For instance, for example, I would say a year ago at this time, a $250,000 home at 3% interest would have a mortgage payment of about $1,000. That's increased almost $500 since the last time we were here, along with those construction prices. So we think in order to make sure that more of our residents, including nurses, teachers, can afford a new home, as home ownership has been a stated goal, that threshold should be increased to 150%, maintaining those thresholds that Ms. Prosser outlined earlier in terms of resale. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony this evening. Greg Mild. Good afternoon.
Good evening now. Yeah, I wish, right? What's that? Yes. Good evening. My name is Greg Mild, and I am here, and I'm representing Columbus Education Association. President John Caniglio is in bargaining all day, so I would take this spot over his any day. I am a proud graduate of Whetstone High School and a proud Columbus educator, public professional educator since 1999 in Columbus City Schools. As you may be aware, Columbus Education Association is vehemently opposed to the continued practice of City Council awarding tax abatement to wealthy developers, which results in a drastic loss of tax dollars received by the Columbus City School District. With the majority of revenue for school districts still coming from property taxes, the abatements cost Columbus City Schools over $51 million in 2021 alone. And the increased practice of awarding abatements is out of control, outpacing the growth of real property within the school district over the past 8 years. In interest of time, I'll be direct and lay out 3 key asks. First and foremost, please stop awarding tax abatements to wealthy developers and companies that do not need them so that the tax burden ceases to be put on the back of Columbus residents. We believe that companies should pay their fair share just like your ordinary citizen. Second, and if abatements will continue to be granted, we ask that you, at a bare minimum, hold these developers to the requirement of providing affordable housing and not let them throw more money at the issue to avoid this direct investment in the Columbus community. The ability to pay a fee to avoid this direct community involvement seems to contradict their need for an abatement in the first place. Finally, we would recommend that every member of City Council take a deep look into those contributing to their campaigns and take a few simple actions. First, return all donations from individuals and entities connected to those companies who are receiving or have received a tax abatement. Second, refuse to accept any donations in the future from these entities. And third, recuse yourselves from any discussion of tax abatements from these entities in the future to avoid any question of a quid pro quo agreement. We do not need another political scandal in our city. Our bottom line is this. We want to focus on what actions City Council can take to invest in the children and families of our city. What can you do to help Ohio's largest public school district thrive? If you want to attract investment in Columbus, let's start talking about the investment that city leaders are making in creating a successful and growing urban school district. The Columbus Education Association is fighting for the schools that Columbus students deserve, and we need to know that you are too. Thank you for your time this evening. And I do want to give a personal shout out to Anissa, who responded to my request at 8:38 p.m. last night. I was impressed by that, so I thought you should know.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any response from the department?
No, as always, appreciate the opportunity to have that feedback. One of the statistics we were looking at, just, going back to the question around what is the abatement areas in the city of Columbus, and between 2019 and 2021, during that abatement policy period, we ended up building, so it's a little bit different than the number you saw on the screen because it's a tighter timeline. 3,000 units, 3,096 units were built in the abated areas. In the city of Columbus, in total, we built about 32,000 units of residential. So it is really targeted in specific areas where that residential tax abatement really is helpful to bring those units online. And again, bringing that additional density into the community, really bringing some of the needed housing supply that we need. And again, the abatement is just it is that 15-year period and only on the improvement, the pre-development value remains on the tax roll in that case.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you again to Director Stevens, Assistant Director of Housing Strategies, Aaron Prosser, and the housing team here at the city, as well as all of our community members here with us tonight, and those that have been with us throughout this process. We truly do appreciate your time, as well as all the work that has been done to address housing needs in our community. I understand that this topic of using the tax abatement as a tool to incentivize affordable housing development is not always popular and can bring about polarizing opinions, many of which includes this idea that these incentives are useless. As I've said many times before, we cannot fix this housing crisis with one policy. We need to be intentional about making changes to our zoning, protecting the affordability we have, and being creative about adding more housing stock in our city. Additionally, it is important to acknowledge the reality of systemic racism, the complex interaction of policies, procedures, laws, and institutions that have created disparities in housing. The reality is that housing insecurity is not evenly distributed across the population. So whether we're talking about evictions, homelessness, or poverty, housing insecurity disproportionately affects people of color, older adults, the disabled, and low-income wage earners. We need to take a holistic, comprehensive approach to understand the needs of our community to properly address our housing crisis. I invite you all to continue to stay engaged with our office and with the Department of Development to share your ideas and to stay updated on what the city is doing. The Department of Development will hold another community meeting on June 21st at 5:30 p.m. at St. Stephen's Community House. I would also like to take a moment to remind everyone about Rentful614.com, which serves as the rental assistant hub for tenants and landlords. And on Wednesday, June 29th, I am hosting a Housing for All education campaign launch and town hall event at 5:30 p.m. at Columbus State Community College. The town hall is intended to boost public awareness of the rights granted to Columbus residents under the Housing for All legislative package, which was passed last year. For more information and to receive the RSVP link, please email my legislative assistant, Anissa Lieben, at aaliban@columbus.gov. Finally, I'd like to thank my staff, Anissa Lieben, Andrew Dyer, Sandeep Jindal, as well as our team here at City Hall for helping us with our technology and streaming, James Lewis and Mark Carter, as well as the team at CTV. This concludes the hearing for this evening, but it does not conclude our continued engagement and conversation. And so please reach out to our office if you would like to continue this conversation. Thank you all for being here this evening. Stay safe and stay cool. Thank you.